Carol, thank you so much for joining us. I would like to do a little introduction about you. Carol is an award-winning actress turned best-selling novelist. She is well known for her role as Helen Harriet in the BBC TV series All Great Creatures Great and Small. During her acting career, Carol went on to gain industry recognition and won many prestigious awards over the years. She is also known for her much-loved memoirs based on her life on an olive farm in Provence. She has also worked with UNESCO to found an olive heritage trail in the Mediterranean basin. And as an accomplished author, Carol has written a stream of fiction and non-fiction. And this has allowed her to indulge in both her passions, writing and acting. And she has also starred in many of the TV adaptations of her books. Carol, her family is originally from County Laois, a proud Irish woman, and she now resides in France. So we will move along and start with the questions, Carol, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Great. Your latest novel, An Act of Love, received excellent advanced reviews, and it was published in April 29th, which was bang smack in the middle of the confinement. So you found yourself in a very unusual situation. I know that you said you were in your home overlooking the Bay of Cannes, but it was quite unusual. What did you miss from the traditional book trail launch?
Well, I miss, first of all, the fact that you've got your readers there with you. I love the idea that, that I'm standing on a stage in front of my readers, because it's the actress as well. That's my opportunity to go back on stage, as it were, to read to people, to talk to them afterwards, maybe have a glass of wine. That conviviality is not the same. I mean, it's lovely to see you smiling. I can see faces up there, but it's not quite the same as, somebody standing at a desk and you're signing your name and they're telling you what they feel about your work and how it's touched them and etc. That's very special. That's a gift, I miss that.
Exactly. Well, you're turning into a pro on the online circuit, that's for sure. You're very busy, which must mean that you're getting good response. Yeah, you're happy enough.
The book's getting wonderful reviews, yes, very good review. I just got one in from Ireland, which was excellent, saying it's my best book so far. So I hope the publishers are pleased. I'm thrilled. So, now we move on.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it myself. So just to talk about the title, An Act of Love, it has a bit of a double sense. You have while it is a romance between the young war refugee and the local villager, it is actually a story based on the love and courage of the population of this small village in the French arrière-pays, and the acts of courage that they undertook during the wartime, and that is a village that is not that far from here in Monaco. So what drew you to this story, which has its roots so far back? We just had the 76th anniversaries of the end of the war for France.
Well, actually, I was up in the hinterland, the arrière-pays, looking for something completely different. This was in the 90s, about 1996. And I was up there researching for something else altogether. And one of those kind of freak moments when you go, it was Saint-Martin Vésubie, which is what my book is inspired by that village, and the people within the village and their acts of courage and kindness. The original title of the book was An Act of Illicit Love, which spoke more for the underground work, the resistance, the fact that people were taken in and hidden at risk of lives, of course. But my editor said that she felt that it was too sexy, too saucy. She didn't want illicit in the title, so we took it out. So indeed, now it does have the idea that it's the love between Sarah and Alain, the young medical student in the village, who in fact turns out to be a member of the resistance, and a young Sarah. It's the story of a Polish family, Sarah and her parents, who've escaped from Poland just at the beginning of the war. They find themselves to France, and many of you may know that the south of France, or our part of the south of France, the eastern part, was very much the free zone. And only until, and that was the case in November 1942, when the Allies won North Africa, Hitler decided to send his troops into the free zone to break the agreement. And of course, up until that point, it had been safe for refugees, displaced people, mainly Jews, but also homosexuals, a few gypsies, etc. They were safe in this free zone. There was no one chasing them. The Italians were brought in to oversee, on behalf of Hitler, this part of France, but they had no interest in chasing or threatening Jews, hunting them. So they felt safe. And then when the Germans started to move closer, Nice being, they wanted Marseille and Nice because they're two strategically extremely important ports in the Mediterranean. So as they got into Marseille, they caused much damage there and rounded up many Jews, thousands of them. And so we're moving closer towards Nice. It meant that all the refugees and the displaced people that were living along the coast had to go inland. And Saint-Martin Vésubie, which in my book is called Ville Vésubie, was one of the small villages that said, we will take in refugees. The village at that time had approximately 600 inhabitants, local villagers, agricultural people, people just living off the land and living their simple mountain life. And they brought in up to, I think, 800 refugees. So the whole balance of the village changed. But for between 42 November and September 1943, when the Nazis really came this close, there was an idyllic period when the refugees could speak their own language. There were Russian Jews, there were Polish, Estonian, and they could speak to each other in Yiddish, or they started chess clubs, they had musical societies. It was a wonderful, diverse, and very liberated moment in time between villagers and the refugees. And my young Sarah, who is the 17-year-old daughter of the family that escape and live in a house just outside the town, falls in love during this period. She's on the brink of womanhood. She has everything going for her except it's wartime, and they're in hiding. So it's a story of a refugee at any period, really. I mean, I studied or watched and spent time with Syrian refugees over in Greece, and it gave me also the idea for this book. And I was so inspired by what these people in this village did. You often hear that the French were difficult with the Jews and that they betrayed them. Some did, that is true, but far more were actually very generous. They either ignored them, so they didn't give them away, or they helped them. And some of them helped them at the cost of their own lives. And this is one of those stories. It's a story of courage. It's a story of love. It's a story of young passion. It's a story of a young girl growing up, a coming of age story. And it's a story of people actually opening themselves up to other kinds of people, a diversification. So it has many levels to it in an act of love.
And I'm curious about some of the characters, if some of those were from your visit to the museum in Saint-Martin Vésubie, that you found actual details about their personal lives that you drew from?
No, I didn't. In the museum was like a little laundry room. There was almost nothing there. I don't even know if it still exists since the terrible, the tempest,
natural disaster
just over a year ago. So I don't even know if I'm going to go back up again with the film crew later this year. So we'll see then what's there. And it seems so unfair for a place that has a history of such generosity to be thus treated. No, I looked a little bit into the one or two stories, and I haven't really kept any of them, except that there was a teacher and a gendarme, not necessarily together, involved in acts of courage. And so I liked the idea that I had the gendarmerie on the side of the underground, though on the surface, playing it by the rule, but actually, furtively helping. And I like the idea that we have a school teacher who was able to bring in refugee children, try to find a common way for them all to integrate and speak with each other, where they could draw a cow on the blackboard or a sheep, and then each of them in their own language go up and write what this little animal was, and a way of starting to open up the possibility between different nations who were there together and who were in the beginning maybe a bit nervous of each other, but education is a way to break those barriers, as we well know. And so I've taken it in a step further and chosen a teacher, a lovely school teacher. I love her, the character, who is very generous and very courageous. And we learn through the story what it actually costs her.
Right. Well, don't give too much away now.
No, I'm not going to give too much away. Very careful.
And Carol, you're a member of a group called the History Girls. And they are writers of historical fiction and non-fiction. And you're one of the key members. So while characters of An Act of Love are all of your imagining, the novel was inspired by real events, as you have adhered to. But in your other books, you have also written extensively on historical themes, including about the famine, My Story, An Irish Girl's Diary, 1845 to 1847, the hunger. Can you tell us a bit about your interest in history and how other like-minded writers in this group, the blog group that you're in, how they help you develop your stories?
We don't interact with each other on our books. Sometimes we ask each other to read the book and review it, because you get another writer's opinion and it goes up on all the websites and things. So we do that for each other. But other than that, we don't actually interact in the day-to-day sense of working on our own material. We're 28. I'm not a key member. I'm just one of 28. We're all equally key members. There are 28 of us. It was started by a wonderful woman called Mary Hoffman, also a writer. We are adult fiction, children's fiction, young adult fiction, which was my market too. But all of us writing at least one of our books historically. So I started when I was writing for Scholastic. I was part of a group, part of a set of writers that wrote a series of books called My Story. And each of these is like a diary. That's the kind of format of the book, told from the point of view, historical, told from the point of view of one character. In my case, they're all young girls, which was actually wonderful grounding for this adult novel, because I've done 5 or 6 of them, and Scholastic are meticulous about the research, as they should be. When my agent at the time, who's not now my agent, but came through and said, Scholastic are looking for writers who would be interested in doing this. Would you like to do one? That's the first one I did. And if so, what would you propose as a subject? So I said, I'd absolutely love to do one. I said, and I'd like to do the Irish potato famine. And my agent came back and said, oh, but that's not English history. And I said, oh, yes, it is.
Oh, my goodness.
It certainly is English history. And so she said, all right, well, I'll go back to them. I don't think they'll take that. And indeed, of course, they did take it. It's now taught in schools, that book, in places like Australia and New Zealand. And so really? As it was a subject extremely passionate, very close to my own family story, and everything. Not that my family was, well, of course, some were in the famine. I'm from a reasonably poor Irish Catholic family that farmed in the Midlands, in Laois. So I could relate very strongly to the idea of people having their one crop, their potatoes, blighted. And indeed, there were many other crops on the island, but they were being taken off to Britain.
Right.
So without getting into a too political story about it, I created this young girl called Phyllis, which was my mother's name. Philomena was my mother's name. And several of the characters are named after members of my family, my Irish family. And so I was able to kind of, in that way, bring it alive and make it very real for me. And the book was incredibly successful. And as I say, it's still taught in schools. And then they went on and put me under contract, and I did several more. And through that, I read about the History Girls, and I wrote to Mary and said, I'd love to be a part of it. And I've now been a member, I think, for about 5 years. It's been going about 8 or 9 years, I think. And we post, it used to be we post once a month, but it was so much when we've all got our own separate work to do, that we now post, I think it's once every 6 months. So every Friday there's a new post. It's a very good website. It's called historygirlsblog.com. And I really recommend it. And we all have very different historical interests. There are 2 or 3 that do write about the Roman period, which is not at all mine. I'm kind of modern history. 20th century history is what interests me. And there are others who do Tudor, all kinds of different areas. So it's a wonderful spread. You know, you can sit there for hours, and there's thousands of posts on there now, and they've kept them all up there. So it's,
yeah,
it's a absolute treasure chest. Yeah.
Okay, we can put the link in with the replay for everybody who's listening in, so they can do it. Yeah, I found that fascinating. So next question. In my teenage years, I enjoyed reading the historical fiction books by Galway author Walter Mackin, including his trilogy, The Silent People, which was also about the famine. And what do you hope the younger generation will take away from reading your books aimed at this age group?
For my young adult books?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I would also include, by the way, An Act of Love in this. Someone on another Zoom I did the other night, a Women's Institute Zoom in Devon, after she finished reading it, she gave it directly to her 14-year-old daughter and said, you know, this is a war story that is so important, and also very important for the understanding of refugees and young people today. So I hope that also this book also speaks to young people. And in that sense, the fact that she's 17 is also quite important, though she does grow up into a woman, of course. I think what I would like to think that young readers take from me, I think compassion. I think an ability to look at everybody and see that there is a human being there, rather than, you know, a race or a class, or, you know, that we can actually look at people and see their personalities and their inner selves. So I would like that for young people to begin to look at, if they don't already, each individual as an individual who has something precious to offer to the rest of us. I hope that they get whacking good stories, you know, a good old read that zips along, and that I maybe can help be one of the ones that help them love reading and love literature. Because, you know, look, here we are in confinement, and one of the best ways to travel has been books. Yes. Films and books. I mean, arts have been an immensely important part of these lockdowns all over the world. Reading has gone up, thank goodness. Book buying has gone up, thank goodness. Okay, a lot of it has gone to Amazon and Jeff Bezos, but apart from that, the actual business of reading and sharing material has become very much more required. And so, you know, something good has come out of this mess.
Absolutely.
And I've played my tiny part in that too.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. The opening chapter of An Act of Love starts with the dramatic revelation by the main character as she lays dying. And it certainly prompts you to read on, that's for sure. Before we find out what she's done, though, the story jumps back to when 17-year-old Sarah from Poland and her parents have to flee Nice as the Nazis approach. How do you get into the character of Sarah?
Well, as I said, first of all, I found out about this this village, and I wrote a little bit about it in one of my scholastic young adult novels, a little bit, called Nowhere to Run. But the story wouldn't leave me. It just battered at me, and I had to go back to it, which is why I've written this entire novel about that particular aspect. But also, my husband is a documentary filmmaker, and we go to an island every year, a tiny island called Castellorizzo, which is about 1 kilometer from Turkey. It's one of the furthest points of Europe. And so, of course, from Turkey to Castellorizzo, it's, if you're desperate, it's swimmable, or you can get a boat and then. And so it meant that it became a stop-off point for refugees. And one of the years I was there, I mean, normally what they did was move them on. The Greeks have been amazing with the refugees and had a lot on their shoulders. They would move them to camps or places where they could be looked after, or they could be moved on somewhere else. But one year, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was there, and there was a family a large family, mother, father, brother, young sister, children, etc., on the island, and they weren't moved on. I'm not quite sure why. They were hoping to get to Germany, and they happened to exist in the kind of shadows of the beach cafe that I used to go to, where I used to have a swim at the end of the day. And I started to observe them. And amongst them was I think she was the sister of the mother figure, the matriarchal figure, where the husband slept on her lap, the children were all around her. And this, I think, was her younger sister. And there she was in her Muslim clothes. And she didn't have her face wrapped, but she, had her gear on and everything. And sometimes she would walk. The island really only consists of this port, which is one kind of street right round it. And then it's mountains all the way over to a couple of little bays. It's very little, not much on it. And sometimes she'd go walking around the port, where people are in bikinis and shorts and sunbathing or getting off boats or having a glass of wine. And there is a young Muslim girl in her full clothes. It must have been 80 degrees, 85 degrees. The rest of us are living la dolce vita. And this girl, along with her family, don't know what their future is, don't know where they're going. Apparently they had a relation in Germany, and so were hoping through the system to be able to all get to Germany, which was about 7 of them. I never found out if they did get there. But I watched her and I became terribly attached to this young girl. I couldn't speak to her. I used to go sometimes and offer water, take them bottles of water and things, because they'd sit in the shade and fan themselves with their scarves and things like this, as you see a lot in Arab countries. And I watched and I became very attached to her. And the two stories, the Saint-Martin and these refugees, modern refugees, sort of married in my head. And it was from there that I really built the story of Sarah and her family. I could relate to, I find the ages between 12 and 20, I think, is an immensely rich period in our lives. There's so much going on, blossoming, frightened, first kisses, first whatever else it is nowadays with young people. But, so much going on, so many fears, so many awakenings. And mine was a particularly turbulent adolescence and young puberty period. So I was thinking how much harder it must be if one is at war. You're trying to deal with all those things like meeting boys, going out to a dance, having a drink. All those things that we take absolutely for granted.
Yes.
Are denied these people, or if not denied, then it's very hard for them to find access or a place. And all of that became food for me, for Sarah, for what she was going through and what she wanted, and indeed what befell her and her family. Yes. So I think that's where the story began, really.
Great, excellent. Just about the place where it takes place in Saint-Martin Vésubie, you referred to the terrible damage that occurred in the natural disaster last winter. And in fact, His Serene Highness Prince Albert II, who is actually Vice President of the Fondation Princesse Grace, and the library is part of that, went to and visited the village to show his solidarity and his support, financial support from the Principality and the Monegasque Red Cross, etc. So the disaster that affected them, there's a little bit of a feeling of history repeating itself almost, that the kinds of disasters, but then the power and the generosity of human spirit to lift us out of that.
The other way around. Yes, the other way around. I just do want to say something about His Serene Highness. I was on the jury for the television festival in Monaco quite some years ago, so I had the great honor of having dinner with him. And I do want to say what a compassionate human being, even just in those few hours we sat together. His understanding of the local language, his interest in the activity of the ordinary people, the fact that he was extremely open in his ideas and thought. I was incredibly moved by the sense of his humanity. And so it doesn't surprise me that he crossed the border and went up to
there. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Smack in the middle of COVID and confinement is really was a sign of that humanity that absolutely was appreciated by everybody there. For sure.
Encounter.
Exactly.
Splendid man.
I think it would be lovely. Can we entice you to read a little bit from your book for us before we ask more questions? And we have some questions coming in from people as well.
Okay, I'm going to read the very short opening chapter 1, which is set in the present in the Alpes-Maritimes, and then it goes directly back to 1943. So I'll read this for you. It's just a page and a bit. Alpes-Maritimes, France, the present. The temperature is falling. Evening settling beyond the window. Darkness soon. A darkness that will enshroud me. I start to shiver. Not cold, but fear. Fear for what is to come. And yet ready. So ready. A tall figure rises from a chair which creaks. He tucks the bed covers tighter about me, encasing my useless legs. Come, Mama. My breath rasps, sawing at my lungs, burning my bronchioles. Let this be over soon. Please, let this be over. How is she? I catch the words from across the room. A little restless. She mutters to herself constantly. I can't make out any sense. A few words, nothing lucid, except Papa's name. She repeats it constantly, calling without voice to Papa. Does she need anything? What could she need now at this stage? A little water, perhaps. Dab her lips, Albert. No, here, let me. Another figure moves to my side, leaning over me, leaning low, wetting my mouth with the feathery touch of a finger. I taste the salt of her flesh. Sarah, Sarah, can you hear me? It's Hannah. Is there anything you need, you require, my dear, dear friend? Anyone you need to see? She waits. I cannot respond. I have no strength. Is anything holding you back from your journey? I smile, always thoughtful, always ready to lend me a hand ever since the beginning. I lift my fingers a few centimeters to caress her. The effort overwhelms me. My arm flops back to the mattress. Forgiveness. Forgiveness for the many mistakes I've made. Clemency for the man I killed. Yes, I killed a man in cold blood. What would my sons think of their old dying mother if they knew that truth? In spite of the circumstances, I have never spoken of that occasion, never divulged it, that unerasable moment from my story of so long ago.
Beautiful.
Are you all still there? Something happened?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
That was beautifully read. It's funny to hear your words and your voice, having read it myself. Thank you, Carol, for that. That's lovely. A couple of questions, and I don't know if we'll have time to get to them all, but perhaps maybe offline we can answer them, and we can pop those up for the readers. So one we have from Anne. I am from Dublin and live in
Anne?
And a member of IWCR. We would love to meet you. So there's a little personal.
Oh, yes, please. Go to my website and or ask for my email address here, and I'd love to do that. Yes,
there you go.
Indeed.
Very personal message from Dublin. Evelyn would like to ask a question. I love the way you describe the secret thoughts and feelings of Sarah. What do you draw on to be able to develop these into coherent sentences?
Well, coherent sentences, I hope. Years and years
Lots of editing.
Speaking Shakespeare and everything else. So I hope that over the years I've learned some coherent sentences. As I say, for the inner life of Sarah, I studied and looked at and this particular young woman on the island of Castellorozzo. And then when I went up into the mountains, I also read lots of refugee stories from the Second World War. not specifically related to my story, but just to get the sense of, the tiny details of what people go through and those kind of things. So it's an amalgamation of many things that, I'm a magpie. I pick bits here, there and everywhere and then begin to put it all into a pie and mix it together.
Oh, that's a lovely. And let's see, we have another one. Thank you very much for your exceptional presentation. This is from Peter Murphy, actually one of our trustees. And we hope soon to be able to give you, for you to be able to talk in person at the library. So that's a nice.
I hope so. Hope so. Thank you, Peter. I'd love to come back.
Yes, and actually, Peter now has reminded me of my important question in terms of the library, because I saw on one of your postings in your blog, you had mentioned when you talked about The Lost Girl, your book that you wrote and published in 2015, and it went into your personal reaction. It's about the atrocities that happened in Paris. And I quote you, it was almost unbearable viewing and very distressing, etc. So your emotional journey is always in there. But you said the book is based on facts, and you spent a month inside the walls of the library, you said, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. Can you tell us the value of the libraries to you, and how do you weave fact and fiction, where the libraries are full of facts, but also fiction? How do you weave them together?
Let me just answer the first half of the question, which, yes, I did. I spent a month at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and it is a lot of my time I was in the Mediathèque and was watching film footage of that November the Friday 13th attacks in Paris, which is part of what the book is about. I watched those attacks on television at our house in the south of France, and I was with my mother. My husband was making dinner, and I was laying the table, and I just put the television on. I don't often do that when we're about to sit down for dinner, but for some reason I put the news on, and then, if any of you remember this, slowly the revelation of how many attacks had taken place, and the Bataclan, all the people that were enclosed there and couldn't get out, the 3 killers, and you could hear the rifle going off. And I was watching this, and I called to Michelle in the kitchen, and because nobody really knew what was happening. And I said, there seems to be some kind of attacks going on in Paris. And my mother came beside me. She wrapped her arms around me, and we were holding on to each other like this with absolute horror. And she said to me, for every one of those young people inside the Bataclan, a music venue, she said, there's a mother outside waiting to know if they will survive.
Oh, it's very emotional.
My mother died 2 or 3 months after that. And I was writing a different book. And my mother, Irish, of course, had come to live with us here, and she died in my arms absolutely unexpectedly. And so I put my book aside for a while, and then those words of hers came back to me. I'd already been to the Bataclan, and I'd laid flowers, and I'd walked between some of the attack places, the venues. And so it was very much with me. It was a terrible, terrible shock. I mean, France really reeled from that. And my mother's words came back to me, and I thought, that's the story I must tell. There's a mother outside waiting to know what happens to her lost girl. And so that was the basis for the book, which is a book that's immensely important to me. I feel it really is one of my babies.
Sharing that very personal moment, yes, it's a key thing for you. That's certainly one that I'm going to read. We have a couple of more questions. Are you okay, Carol? I think we're going to run out of time, and it's probably a good point to stop, because you're.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine.
We can see how you're just so wonderful in how much you share with us. We really appreciate that. So, Rowena from Australia. I haven't got a question, but I wanted to say say hi from Australia.
Hello.
Obviously, a friend who wants to.
Is it 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia?
I think it's 1 or 2 in the morning. There you go.
well done. Thank you for being here.
And Evelyn also says, thank you for your coherent answer to my question. Evelyn is a Scottish fan from The Hague in Holland. So very international audience we have here. And
we are, well, Monaco is one of the most international places on the earth. So that's not surprising.
So on that very international note, I see the time is clicking down. We only have a minute left before we'll probably get cut off. But I wanted to say thank you so much, Carol, on behalf of everybody, the audience and our trustees at the Princess Grace Irish Library. As you can see behind me, the books are waiting to house your book and to welcome you back for the next time. Still getting messages in that this was so enjoyable. Thank you. So you have plenty of fans out there, and we hope that we will see you very shortly and enjoy a bit of downtime from the sounds of your busy.
Well, I look forward to whizzing over in my car and coming and saying hello to you, giving you a hug, which we can't do at the moment. I'm longing for that. Absolutely longing. So,
I look forward to that. Thank you so much, Carol. And
keep
more and more messages.
Everyone.
I'll send you all of those. Everyone's thrilled to be once more here, and thank you for the talk. We will see.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you soon, I hope. Bye. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.